Well, good morning and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Beth Hawley with the Arizona Realtors, and we're proud to bring you these free webinars designed exclusively to keep you updated on issues in the industry. Today's presentation will be about 45 minutes long. If you have any questions during the webinar, please write them in the question box and we'll answer at the conclusion. If you'd like to change the size of the webcam, click on the line separating the webcam and the PowerPoint presentation and then drag. So as always, today's webinar will be recorded and available next week on our website at aaronline.com. So joining us today is Patrick McQueen, founder and partner of McQueen & Gottlieb. Patrick's 14-year legal career has been highlighted by work primarily in the areas of real estate transactional law and real estate litigation. He recently prevailed in several Arizona Court of Appeals matters and one with the Arizona Supreme Court. He served as local counsel in the $129 million acquisition of the City North development adjacent to Desert Ridge Marketplace in North Phoenix. So welcome, Patrick, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. We have somewhat of a pretty relevant topic right now that kind of crept up on us in the legal world. In the legal world, we're usually about 6 months behind what's actually going on, but this one we seem to are pretty much on top of this one. If you want to pull the slides up so I can see them a little bit better. That's an introduction to me. It's been a pretty good year for us, but we can move on quickly from that one. We're here to talk about some recent trends in short-term rental law, and there's been a lot in the news. There's been a lot of cases, and this probably represents 20 to 25% of what we have going on right now. We're seeing injunctions. We're seeing amendments to CC&Rs. We're going to talk about all these. We're seeing nuisance-based lawsuits. We're seeing zoning and licensing issues. And there's been quite a few evening news stories, which we'll click on in a second. Let's go back. So we're seeing injunctions on the rise to stop short-term rentals. An injunction is a request. It's an immediate request for a court order to stop somebody in your neighborhood from using an Airbnb or a short-term rental. And it's a very powerful tool that we see HOAs using, we see private citizens using when they're upset about a short-term rental or they believe that one of the short-term rentals in their neighborhood is illegal. We're also seeing amendments to CC&Rs. A lot of the HOAs don't know how to deal or did not know how to deal with the influx of short-term rentals, VRBOs, Airbnbs, and they want to create mechanisms to stop them or to limit them or to better police them. And so we're seeing a lot of amendments to CC&Rs, a lot of votes for HOA changes. Okay? We're also seeing nuisance-based lawsuits. What a nuisance-based lawsuit is, and we'll get into this a little bit more, what a nuisance-based lawsuit is just what it sounds like. My next door neighbor is creating a nuisance because he or she is allowing parties to happen, banquets to happen in their backyard, parties at night, throwing beer bottles, those sorts of things. And so we're seeing people bringing nuisance-based lawsuits to stop those. And then we're also seeing zoning and licensing issues that are coming up. People are trying to inquire with the City of Phoenix as to whether these types of rentals are allowed. A lot of times the zoning inquiries deal with the use of these as a business, and so the determination needs to be made as if this is a business or not. And we're also seeing people serving alcohol, serving food in these VRBO types of homes as an additional service. And there's a lot of people wondering whether that's legal. And we don't have much guidance there. The other issue that comes up quite a bit is parking. If people are having parties because they're renting they have a short-term rental, they want to know whether the zoning code permits these people to park there. And so just a lot of unique issues with short-term rentals at the moment. There's been a couple of news stories I've been featured on two, and we'll play the clip just so you can kind of see what's going on. One of them involved an Arizona Cardinals football player, so you may recognize the name on that first one.
Sorry, bear with me while I try and get this to work right. Some people have been complaining about degraded audio, and I apologize. Hopefully that problem has been solved. Please let me know if it hasn't.
Hospital to experience exceptional care without the wait. We provide outpatient imaging and lab services 24/7 with same-day results. Phoenix ER and Medical Hospital, located on the southwest corner of Dobson and Queen Creek in Chandler.
Oh no, here we go again. We don't know what to expect.
Problem partiers, noisy Airbnbs have some Valley homeowners taking legal action. And tonight, one man says a party this past weekend was the final straw.
ABC 15's Zach Crenshaw looking into what rights you have. And Zach, this is a problem peaking around this time of year.
During these cooler winter months, visitors flock to Phoenix. And chances are, if you live in the valley, you live near an Airbnb rental listing. Most of the time, it's not an issue. But for some valley homeowners, every weekend rental is a potential nightmare. On a hill in North Phoenix,
We moved here hoping this would be a dream house that has great views.
but for Charles and his roommate, every weekend brings worry.
It's been a nuisance between the traffic, all hours of the night, music,
Can you be respectful?
litter, public urination. I mean, you name it, we've dealt with it.
For the past year, the neighbor has Airbnb'd her home. This past weekend, Charles says Cardinals player Robert Camdice rented the house. Police received 4 calls to the property, the last at 4:15 a.m. They cited Camdice's older brother Brian for drinking champagne in a running car.
Law enforcement is sort of hamstrung. They'll say, listen, this is a civil issue. We can't really do much.
Patrick McQueen is a real estate attorney. He sees rowdy rental issues all the time.
It's going to the neighbor. It's going to the HOA. It's going to the city government to see if there's something that can be done. Usually there's not much that can be done. And then it's filing a nuisance-based lawsuit.
Charles isn't there yet.
We did seek legal counsel, and our lawyer reached out and sent a cease and desist letter.
The neighbor's Airbnb listing now says not suitable for large events or crazy parties. And that neighbor told me other people in the area have never complained. Charles still disagrees.
If it was regular Airbnb rentals to families and things like that, I have no problem with that. I do that again for my Airbnb.
He isn't giving up, though. Not until Charles says he can peacefully sleep on the weekends.
We've had dozens and dozens of nights where we've been woken up at all hours.
In Phoenix, Zach Crenshaw, ABC 15, Arizona.
Okay. So hopefully some of you could hear that. Hopefully all of you could hear that. That's just one example. There's also another news story, and this was a particularly frustrating one. The second one, it's not an actual a video. There was a video part of it, but now it's a written article. But the issue there was we represented a seller of a home, and the seller wanted to sell the property to somebody who was going to use the property as a vacation rental, a VRBO type of deal. And she told her neighbors about that, and the neighbors, we believe, interfered with the contract that she had, causing a cancellation of the real estate sales contract, causing her to lose $50,000 on her contract. And so that was somewhat of a different issue, but nonetheless, it had something to do with some of these folks' disdain or discontent with VRBOs, and maybe some misinformation by them. They may not have understood exactly what was going on. Nonetheless, we believe they interfered with our client's right to sell her home to a VRBO, owner. And we're seeing that a lot. Another trend, although it's not on the screen, people are coming from out of state and they want to invest in these properties. They're buying up entire blocks and doing these short-term rentals. And so there's a lot out there right now, and so hopefully we can shore up some of the misunderstandings. Okay, next slide. So there's about 4 things that we're going to go over. We're going to talk about the origins of short-term rentals. We're going to get into current laws and state ordinances. There's really not many. And we're going to go over some typically litigated issues, and we kind of talked on those a little bit already. And we're going to go over some tips for you as real estate licensees assisting somebody in purchasing a VRBO or in dealing with your own. Go ahead and switch the slide. So the origins of short-term rentals, I know we've got some text up on the screen there, but Short-term rentals have been around for quite a while. They seem to have gained popularity with the sort of internet sharing culture, similar to the car companies Lyft and Uber that sort of share, their extra space in their cars. Now we're sharing extra space in our homes. Remember when I was a kid, my mom told me never to get in a stranger's car, but everybody's doing that now, and now everybody's opening up their homes to complete strangers as well. So it's kind of a unique time in our history. But short-term rentals have been around for a very, very long time. The first one was the first documented one was in 1624 when Louis XIII created a hunting lodge and rented it out to his friends. In the 1800s, we found research showing that letters back and forth between friends asking to use vacation rentals or vacation homes and renting them out. In the late 1800s, we start seeing the first real timeshares. 1837, as you probably know, the telegraph was invented, or as you may not know, so owners could respond to guest inquiries. And then in 1985, we have the Vacation Rental Management Association that's created. So we're starting to see some more trends in vacation rentals here in the United States. And then, of course, 1995, Al Gore creates the internet, which sort of allowed for the continuation of all of this industry. The tax revenue to Arizona is significant. That's why it's an important issue that we all need to address. $11.5 million in tax revenue in 2017 in Arizona alone. A couple interesting facts about the origins of Airbnb. Airbnb was originally created for convention overflow. It then turned into this massive room sharing scenario. Same thing with VRBO. The original intent behind it was to use up unused ski lodges in Breckenridge, Colorado. It started with just one. And now you can see the statistics I posted on there, 34,000 cities, 191 different countries, $28,000 or so in average rental for each home. So it is quite a business, and people are trying to capitalize on their extra space or making it their own business. Some people will buy 10 of these at a time for the extra cash flow because it does provide pretty good cash flow. 14% of travelers use this at least once a year now, so it's becoming much more popular. $30 billion industry just for Airbnb alone. Go ahead and take it to the next slide. So we talked about this is sort of the timeline. Again, $100 billion industry overall, but those are the origins of short-term rentals. Thought you might find some of those to be somewhat humorous, but that's sort of the evolution. They've been around a long time, although it's now coming to the forefront because of all of the room sharing and the home sharing concepts and the internet sharing and the internet economy. Go ahead and switch it. So let's talk about state laws. And I will tell you, there's not much. Arizona is a tourist economy. We have a strong tourist economy here. And so we've had a couple of laws that were passed, including ARS 9-539, ARS 11-269, both of which basically prohibit either counties or cities from stopping short-term rentals. And so in essence, the state has found it to be compelling enough to protect the industry, and they want people here utilizing short-term rentals. Now, there is a House Bill 2672, which amends both of those statutes that I mentioned above. And those amendments are going to require, and it's not passed yet, but it's going to require not more than 2 adults per sleeping room. It's going to restrict the number of people at a VRBO rental after 10 p.m. Okay, so you're not going to be able to have these big parties like you used to be able to. Initially, the new amendment to this bill, or the bill itself, the founders of the bill, or the creators of the bill, wanted safety and monitoring equipment to be placed at any VRBO house. That's since been nixed from the proposed legislation. And there's a registration obligation with the county, and that's for taxes and law enforcement purposes, because what they want to do is create a central database as to who truly owns these properties so that they can be contacted in case there are parties. Okay, and then there's also a series of fines that can be imposed if you're violating any of those regulations that we just went over. The fines start at $250. They go up to $1,000. There's a proposal to have them be misdemeanors if this behavior continues or these rentals continue. So it's been going back and forth quite a bit as to what is actually going to be good for the Arizona economy. But so at this moment, we really don't have much in terms of statutes. Like I said, ARS 9-500.39 and ARS 11-269.17, all they basically say is counties and cities cannot pass laws to stop short-term rentals. You can pass ordinances, you can pass regulations if they deal with health and safety, but nobody's really come up with much. Now there's an amendment. Now there's a bill out there to maybe put some teeth to some of these partier situations. Okay. Now, the city of Scottsdale itself has come up with a couple of their own ordinances. For instance, in Scottsdale, one of the rules is all dwelling units and accessory guest houses must be rented together. They can't be separately rented. So if you have a guest house, you have to rent the entire property as opposed to just the guest house or the main house. Okay, so it has to be all rented together. All dwelling units must have a maximum family size of 6 adults and the related dependent children of those 6 adults. So we're not going to allow this big, huge, family reunions to happen at one particular place. So City of Scottsdale has done something. City of Phoenix hasn't done much. Tempe hasn't done much at this point. So the biggest thing right now is this proposed legislation to amend the 2 statutes that we just talked about to hopefully minimize the partying, and that's sort of the goal of those. Now, the other laws that we talked about. Okay, we talked about the Scottsdale Code. We talked about zoning ordinances a little bit. So a lot of people are trying to use zoning ordinances to enforce their rights when it pertains to somebody who's partying. If you're using the street for parking, if you're using the property for a business, hey, are these zoning code violations? Again, we just don't have much guidance from the courts on this at the moment, but that'll be coming soon. Again, remember what I said, the law is usually 6 months behind what's really going on, and so hopefully we'll get a little bit more guidance pretty quickly here. But a lot of people are pushing those zoning issues and saying, hey, you're running a small business out of your house, you're in the wrong district to be doing that, okay? Or hey, your parking is getting out of control here, this violates another zoning provision, okay? And then we have nuisance laws. A nuisance, I'm going to read the definition because nuisance is hard to prove. From a legal perspective, the definition of nuisance is essentially a situation where somebody acts so unreasonable and you're interfering with the use and enjoyment of property, causing significant harm. Okay, in our world, in the legal world, that usually means multiple instances and something significant, something that would bother a number of people. Okay, so if people are partying, people are gathering, and it happens once, there's not much you can do. But if it's a constant situation, if it's a constant partying, if it's a constant noise, if it's constant parking issues, then maybe we get in and we're starting to trend towards the nuisance issue. Okay, so those are the real Arizona laws, and again, we're kind of dancing on the edges here. We don't have much that's concrete. Other jurisdictions, other states, other cities have much more concrete rules in place. You look at Austin, you look at Nashville, you look at New Orleans, and they've got these major restrictions that have been imposed. Do we want those in Arizona? I don't know. I'll leave that to you guys, or the politicians. But we just don't have much here. Okay, go ahead and switch to the next slide. Now, the question always comes, I have a property in an HOA. What can my HOA do to stop me from having a VRBO home? And the HOAs can actually do a lot. Okay, the HOAs can actually amend the CC&Rs, amend certain other rules and regulations to stop this or to limit it significantly. And what we're seeing right now are HOAs sort of buying into this trend of amending the CC&Rs to stop the vacation rentals. Okay, usually has to go to a vote, usually has to have a recorded amendment, and then you have to have some policing of those new amendments. And that can be the tough part. Finding out who's actually renting these out on a short-term basis, tracking them, and doing something about it, that becomes an HOA obligation if you're in a property where there's been a rule that's been passed that says you can't have these, or they must be limited, or they must be 30-day rentals or 90-day rentals. That's what we're seeing a lot of. We're seeing minimum rentals of 30 days, and that really kills the VRBO concept. We also see a lot of deed restrictions that people are attempting to enforce. Okay, in certain deed restrictions. So a deed restriction is something that's been recorded on title for a very long time, and it restricts the use of property. Most deed restrictions are going to say something like, hey, you have to have all single-story homes here, or hey, you have to have two-story homes here, or hey, you can't have chickens or wild animals in your backyard. All right, well, that's what most deed restrictions say. But a lot of the deed restrictions also say, well, hey, you can't have unaccompanied guests at your house. Well, that almost seems like exactly what VRBO is. All right, and so a lot of people are attempting to push the issue with deed restrictions and see how far that they can be enforced and see what a court is willing to do. The other issue is you can't run a business. A lot of deed restrictions say you cannot run a business, and so the issue is a VRBO, is that a true business? I don't know the answer. Nobody really knows the answer. There have been 7 states right now that have some sort of court that's danced around the issue and said VRBOs and Airbnbs are businesses. And so that could have a big impact on the way in which Arizona courts interpret the same thing. A lot of people who have VRBOs and Airbnbs say, well, this isn't really a business. They're just guests. It shouldn't be interpreted as a business, but 7 states thus far have said, yes, these are actual businesses requiring a business license or requiring that you not do this because your deed restrictions say you can't do it. And so the issue of guests, the issue of what is a business, those are all sort of items that need to be tested and items that need to be addressed by the Arizona courts, which we think will be coming shortly. Now, how do you amend your CC&Rs? It's usually a fairly easy process. You look to see what the vote requirement is. You put it on an agenda item. The issue is going to be you're going to have to get, if you want a regulation on VRBOs or any sort of short-term rentals, you're going to have to get a large population of the folks living within your HOA to want to amend them, to want to stop this. And some people just don't care enough to do anything about it. And so amending the CC&Rs can be quite difficult. Go ahead, next slide. So we went over these currently litigated issues. Again, nuisance claims is sort of an unreasonable behavior that causes you significant harm. That's one of the claims that's out there. Injunctions to get these things stopped. And again, I explained what an injunction is. Basically, an HOA or a private citizen says, hey, I've had enough of this. My next door neighbor is throwing these huge parties. My next door neighbor is renting out to a cast of characters that is unsavory or whatever the issue is. I want this to be stopped. I want the court to say this must stop because it's a business. This must stop because my HOA requires it. This must stop because it's a nuisance. And the court enters what's called an injunction to stop it. And it's sort of a 50-50. It depends on what judge you get to know whether your injunction is going to work or not. We also see a lot of cases that are being brought as requests for declaratory relief. And what declaratory relief is a request to the court that says, hey, judge, we've got one set of homeowners who believes that a business is a VRBO or a VRBO is a business. We've got another group of homeowners that says there's no way this is a true business. We need you to determine, we need you to provide a declaration, a judicial declaration as to what these deed restrictions really mean, what it truly means to have a business here, and whether Airbnb constitutes an actual business. And then, as I mentioned, we also have a situation that sort of came up recently where we were representing a seller. And the seller told one of their neighbors, hey, the buyer here wants to open a VRBO or have a VRBO at this property. And the next door neighbor, we believe, caused a cancellation of a real estate contract. And so that's kind of a side issue, but we see people who are so angry with the VRBOs right now that they're willing to go to steps that, may interfere with contracts. And in this particular situation, we have a Binzer that basically says, I am canceling because your neighbor approached me and interfered with my right to inspect this property and indicated that they were going to give me trouble if I opened a VRBO. And so this is happening out there, guys, and it's pretty significant. And so that's kind of a side issue. But we see these neighbor disputes, and it's creating a lot of tension for a lot of people. Go ahead and next slide. So I want to give you guys some tips as licensees and as people who may own or rent out your houses for VRBO purposes. Number one, we have to be very, very clear. We don't want to call these leases. We don't want to call them short-term leases. Okay, we want to call them licenses. A lease gives people a property right. A lease requires that you go to court to evict them. A license just says, hey, you can use this, and I have the right to revoke your license and kick you out of here. Baseball tickets, those are licenses to use that seat for a particular time for a particular purpose. A lease is your property right. So we want to make sure that we're making that distinction whenever we're talking about a VRBO or an Airbnb. We're not giving more rights than are required to be given. If they are not tenants, we don't want to call them tenants. They are licensees. They have the right to use the license for a particular purpose and for a particular time frame. And if we need to get rid of them, we can now call the police instead of going and issuing a 5-day notice and that sort of stuff. Okay. Second bit of advice: if you have a VRBO, if you have an Airbnb, you got to put it in an LLC. It's critically important. If something goes wrong at the house and it's not in an LLC, you may have personal liability. Okay, so if you have it in an LLC, 123 ABC VRBO LLC, whatever you want to call it, that's fine. Just put it in an LLC. It gives you an extra layer of protection if something does go wrong at the property. Okay, third is insurance. Talk to your insurance agent about what type of insurance. Tell them what you're doing, because you would hate to have a situation where they say, oh, you're renting this out. Oh, that's a business. You needed commercial liability insurance as opposed to your homeowners. Homeowners isn't going to cover it. Therefore, you're not covered. It's on you. So talk to your insurance agent. They have policies out there. They have riders out there to cover these types of situations. Okay. The fourth bit of advice, I mean, this is pretty obvious. If you're going to consider having a VRBO or converting your existing house into a VRBO or an Airbnb or any sort of short-term rental, make sure you're looking at City of Scottsdale website. They have a frequently asked question, which provides a lot of guidance. Make sure you're looking at the City of Phoenix code, and I've listed a couple of chapters that are applicable for you. Tempe, same thing. You want to make sure that you're in compliance with city code so that somebody can't ding you and say, hey, look, this is an illegal business. Hey, look, this is illegal parking. You want to make sure you're in complete compliance. Or, hey, look, she's selling alcohol, or he's selling alcohol at this property, or pairing it with the guest services that you're providing. You don't want to do that. And then you want to have a written agreement with anybody who is using your house. Okay. Well, a lot of people don't have anything. And so that always amazes me that you don't have some sort of written agreement that says, listen, if I need to get rid of you, you agree to go. This is a short-term license. This isn't a rental. You agree to that. And you know, you want to have a number of other provisions that allow you to get rid of these people if they're causing a problem, allow you to collect from them if they cause you a problem. And if you need a written agreement or any provision, let me know. We have those available. I'll send them to you if you just send me an email and ask me for them. That's all I have for today, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer them for you.
We have questions. Let me pull them up. Thank goodness. Okay, so the laws you were talking about, those obviously they don't trump HOA rules, correct? Just for clarifying.
No, and so no, they definitely don't. If an HOA or CC&Rs are a private agreement between you and your HOA and you and the other members within the HOA. Okay, and so if your HOA says something, you have to live by it. Well, you don't have to live by it. You can run the risk of not living by it, but those are rules that must be abided to if you're in the HOA. Okay, and so HOAs can literally set whatever rules they want, and you may be out of luck if they're more restrictive than what the City of Phoenix provides or what Arizona statute provides. Again, it's a private agreement that you've entered into, and by virtue of that, you're kind of bound by them.
So if an HOA does an amendment to regulate this in some way, are existing ones grandfathered in then, or?
Probably not. Probably not. In most instances, they're not grandfathered in, and even with these statutes that are being proposed, I don't think there's going to be any grandfathering in, which is kind of bizarre. But when you elect a board for your HOA, you better be careful as to who you're electing and what sort of position they're going to take on certain issues, including short-term rentals, because it can change and the rules can change, and there really is no grandfathering.
Where do they go to research deed restrictions?
Sure. So you can contact the title company, who can pull any deed restrictions that are applicable to your particular property, or you can go to you may be able to do a search on the Maricopa County Recorder site to figure out if some are applicable. But the easiest way to go is actually to look at the title policy you received when you purchased your house, and there'll be written deed restrictions usually referenced in there. Now, some properties don't have deed restrictions. Some properties don't have anything that affects their ability to use short-term rentals. Some properties are not affected by deed restrictions, and so and that's fine too. I mean, that is fairly common with homes that are not in HOAs and homes that are a little bit older, 40s, 50s, 60s. There's not a lot of deed restrictions out there. And so best way to go is either the recorder site or title company to see what's out there that affects your particular property.
So what happens if you've been operating an Airbnb for 4 years and you're in an HOA, you haven't had a problem, nobody's complaining, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a notice in your email. You're in violation of the CC&Rs. But it's been 4 years, so.
Well, you look to determine whether there has been an amendment to the CC&Rs. You look to, what specifically they're referencing, which provision in the CC&Rs they're referencing that you're in violation of. And then you do try to make an argument based on legal estoppel or legal waiver. Okay, let me explain what those mean. Estoppel and waiver sort of mean, hey, I've been doing this a very long time, and hey, nobody ever had a problem with it, so guess what? You've waived your right to bother me about it. Okay? Is that going to work? Probably not, but you can convince some HOA boards to get off your back if you've got those arguments. But that's been coming up quite a bit, particularly in North Scottsdale, particularly in Sedona, Flagstaff, more touristy areas. We see a lot of people who are like, hey, my HOA is coming after me now. Hey, I got this cease and desist letter. I've been doing this for a long time. I've never had a problem. And so people are not real happy about that. But there's not much you can do except argue those waiver and estoppel arguments.
What evidence does an HOA need to say that you're operating?
Well, that's a really good question. And that's the tough part for HOAs. How does an HOA truly know where this property is located? How do they truly know that this is being operated as a VRBO? Well, a lot of times if you leave your address on VRBO or Airbnb, well, then you're going to get nailed. Other times, you see the HOAs patrolling and they'll take pictures. They'll be driving around on a golf cart or something like that, and they'll be taking pictures of the constant overflow or overturning or changing over of tenants. I've seen that happen as well. So as far as evidence goes, they'll use any number of things to try to nail you. A lot of times it starts with a neighbor who complains, a neighbor who says, hey, can you take a look at what's going on over here? I think they've got an Airbnb and I'm pretty sure it's not allowed. Can you start taking a look at this stuff? So they're going to gather whatever sort of evidence they need to try to prove this. They're going to look online to see if they can find something. They're going to kind of camp out outside of houses. I've seen them do that. I've heard of them doing that. And so they'll try to gather whatever sort of evidence they need to do that. And then you're going to have to come back and say, well, it was a one-time thing. It was just my brother or whatever it is, and show them that this wasn't an Airbnb or it was. I always recommend to people, hey, have a conversation with the neighbors and say, this is what we're doing. I'm coming from out of state. I'm living out of state now or whatever it is. I want to do short-term rentals. I want to make this a good experience for everybody. So if you ever run into a situation, please let me know before you contact the HOA. Now, sometimes that backfires, but in other instances, it creates better harmony. You have an easier access to say to the owner, hey, listen, you got some rowdy ones this weekend. Can you do something about that before it gets to be problematic? So I always recommend people try to talk to their neighbors. Again, I know that doesn't happen a lot. I know that's somewhat of an awkward conversation. But HOAs will gather the evidence. HOAs have been gathering the evidence. As to how they gather it, again, usually starts with a couple of neighbor complaints, and then they're kind of camping out in front of your house to see what's going on, or looking online to see if they can plug in your address for one of these. Now, if this new bill passes, I think it's going to be much easier to determine which houses are VRBOs and which are not. There's going to be a central database that requires everybody to sort of apply for a license or have a license or have some sort of registration. And then it's going to be real difficult, because if you're operating without a license or operating without this registration, well, then you're going to be subject to fines. And so it's going to likely result in more people registering their VRBOs, and you'll be able to find out that way.
Okay, so going back to the question before about the HOA notifying, apparently in this particular situation, there were CC&Rs drafted, but the HOA was never actually formed.
Interesting. Yeah. No, that's funny.
Do they have any legal recourse to enforce that then?
Well, they may have if there may be deed restrictions or CC&Rs that exist, and even if there's no sort of governing authority or governing board or governing HOA, usually private citizens who are subject to those CC&Rs or who are subject to those deed restrictions can bring their own action. So let's assume that you've had a set of CC&Rs that were recorded in the 1970s, and through the years they had an HOA, but it kind of disbanded. We've seen that happen a couple times. And what we have is a situation where somebody's having a VRBO and it's getting nuts. Well, those documents, you can seek to enforce them. A private citizen can seek to enforce them without an actual HOA there. They can seek to enforce them. Now, the argument's going to be, well, these went away because there's no HOA, but and so you're really at the whim of how the judge is going to interpret that situation. It can be kind of tricky, and I've seen judges go both ways and say, well, look, because there's no governing board, because there's no true HOA anymore, these things have been abandoned, and I'm not going to enforce them. In other situations, judges say, look, you bought in with this property there was a deed restriction, you knew about it, and private citizens can enforce them. So it's tough, and it's a balancing act, and you will sometimes get judicial interpretations from courtroom to courtroom that are significantly different, and that's kind of what we're dealing with right now with where we're at with the laws.
So this is probably going to be the same answer for this next question.
Okay.
That say the board they know they don't have the votes to win a restriction, but they're just telling everybody there are restrictions anyway.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't do that. Yeah, no, I've seen situations where you'll have board members who want there to be restrictions, but they know they can't get the 66 2/3 votes or the 75% vote or whatever it is. And so they'll sort of make this up and say, well, there's restrictions, or we're going to restrict this. And it sort of gets, this viral sort of, hey, there's restrictions that exist. Yeah, can't do that. That's sort of an illegal move by a board. I just, as a board member, if you're a board member, you don't want to go out there sort of making up rules without any real teeth to them. Probably not a good call there. Maybe a breach of fiduciary duty by a board member to be out there sort of making up rules without the proper votes.
So just to clarify,
Sure.
If you've been doing it for years and then the rules change and now you can't, you're just kind of out of luck.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think a lot. I mean, you may be able to convince your board, hey, there haven't been any problems. Hey, I started this a long time ago and no issues have come up. Hey, you waived your right to previously enforce this, but I don't think that works. In most sets of CC&Rs, there's what's called a non-waiver provision, and it's usually buried in there. It's legal boilerplate. And what it says is, just because we haven't enforced one of our rules in the past doesn't mean we're not going to enforce it in the future. And so that's tough to get around. Most courts will enforce that. And so if there's new rules, you're usually subject to them. And that's what it means to be a part of to be a part of an HOA. You're buying in there knowing there's this potential that the rules can change because of unforeseen circumstances. Because when the CC&Rs were drafted in the 80s or 90s or whatever it was, there wasn't even the internet. There wasn't this short-term rental desire. There wasn't this internet sharing economy. And so the boards sort of need to have that flexibility if they want to change the CC&Rs. And yeah, I think you're going to be stuck by them.
So do you have any suggestions on what people can provide to HOAs to just kind of, give the other side of the story?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. And I've had a number of real estate agents who tell me, listen, VRBOs actually increase property values. People want to buy more in VRBO friendly areas because it increases property values. Now, I thought that was somewhat counterintuitive, but I've had multiple real estate agents and real estate brokers tell me that you get higher appraisals where VRBOs are allowed. And so that's part of the story that needs to be told to the HOAs. The other part of the story is, listen, we're doing our best to police these people. Here are the agreements that we have with all of our licensees or people who can use, that have a license to use my property. Here's how I've required them to be respectful. And here's evidence that we've had no problems. Look, there's been no police reports. Look, there's been no neighbor concerns, that sort of stuff. So I think the message needs to get out on both sides. And I think that would be helpful. But the biggest thing for me was my concern would have been property values. It seems to me that most HOAs are tasked with doing things, or they should be tasked with doing things to increase property values. And what I didn't realize is that there are a number of neighborhoods where VRBOs have actually increased the values. I didn't think that would be the case, but I've been told otherwise. And so I think that's part of the message that needs to get out there, is that these may be good for resale.
Good to know. Mm-hmm. So the next time somebody tells you that, ask them for the data.
Yeah, no, I definitely want the data. Because that to me is really interesting to. I've heard it from multiple sources though, and so that's why I'm like, wait a minute, this is kind of interesting here as to what's really going on. And here's the other thing: 90% of the time, these are very successful. 90% of the time, there are no issues. It's these ones that are, distant owners who come from out of state who don't really care. They just kind of want to come to Arizona, make some money off of us, and be on their way. Most owners care. Most owners have agreements. Most owners have something in writing that allows for them to evict or get rid of these people pretty quickly. And most tenants, or I don't want to call them tenants, most people who are visiting are pretty respectful. Now, you're going to get some people from the Midwest, I'm from the Midwest, who want to come here because they've seen snow for 6 months and sunshine does something to them. The vitamin D hits their body plus the alcohol, and they just go nuts. So 10% of the time that happens. But for the most part, 90% or so are successful. And so that's kind of the message I would get to the HOAs.
Okay, great. Well, if any of you have specific questions relating to a situation that you're currently dealing with, please feel free to reach out to Patrick for legal advice. Sure. Any final thoughts?
No, this is, like I said, this has been an area that has sort of really, really jumped almost out of control. Like I said, 20 to 25% of my practice right now is in dealing with VRBO situations. We've got investors coming from out of state. They want to understand what they're subject to. We've got homeowners who are angry, and so there's a lot of interplay between a lot of different parties, and so it's a pretty fluid area of the law right now, and we would expect that it's just going to continue like that, particularly in a state like ours, where we've got beautiful weather for in the winter months. We don't see too many problems in the summer months, but in the winter months, that's when we start seeing the majority of our calls about VRBOs and short-term rentals. So it's a fluid area. It's changing. Continue to stay up with the laws. That's really what I recommend. And if you're engaged in VRBO renting or use of your home as a VRBO. Certainly consider doing an owner LLC. That's huge. Certainly consider reaching out to me for some of those agreements. Just these basic provisions that you need to protect yourselves, and stay up on the laws. That's the real key here.
Great. Well, thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone for joining us. This will be on our website, hopefully by Friday at the soonest, but next week more likely. So have a good day.